50 years ago, in the quiet reaches of the Lyra system, the Drakian Dominion stumbled upon what seemed to be an insignificant human outpost. It was a modest research station, orbiting a barren moon, with no weapons to speak of and only 200 souls aboard. To the Dominion, it was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a speck in their expanding empire. The Drakian fleet, a force of 15 massive warships, arrived with the confidence of predators certain of an easy meal. These ships were colossal, their hulls shimmering like liquid obsidian under the cold light of the nearby star. Their weapons bristled with destructive potential, and their commanders had grown accustomed to the sight of enemies kneeling before them. The Dominion issued their standard ultimatum: surrender, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will be destroyed. For the Drakians, this was routine. Every species they had encountered before had chosen survival. After all, what creature would choose death over submission? But when the humans responded, their reply was not what the Drakians expected. It was just a single word: no. At first, the Drakian commanders laughed. They assumed it was a bluff, a feeble attempt by a desperate and primitive species to save face. The research station was surrounded, dwarfed by the immense warships that loomed over it like shadows of doom. The humans had no chance. There was no fleet coming to rescue them, no hidden weapon to turn the tide. For all intents and purposes, they were utterly defenseless. And yet they said no. Tarek's voice trembles slightly as he recalls what happened next, the memory still vivid even after decades. The humans didn't wait for the Drakians to make the first move. Instead, they acted on their own terms. Without warning, the research station erupted in a blinding explosion. The light was so intense it seemed to tear through the fabric of space itself, a supernova of defiance. The station, along with all 200 humans aboard, was obliterated in an instant. But the explosion didn't stop there. The blast was so powerful that it consumed 4 of the Drakian warships, tearing through their shields and reducing them to twisted wreckage. The silence that followed was deafening. The remaining Drakian ships drifted in stunned disbelief, their crews struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The humans had sacrificed themselves, every man, woman, and child, without hesitation. They had turned their own home into a weapon, choosing destruction over submission. Tarek's voice grows heavy, the weight of the memory pressing down on him. We thought it was an isolated act of fanaticism, he says, his tone laced with regret. We thought they were desperate, irrational. We didn't realize it was a preview of what was to come. The image of the explosion lingers in Tarek's mind. He remembers the way the fiery debris illuminated the cold emptiness of space. He remembers the shock that rippled through the Drakian fleet, the first seeds of doubt taking root in the minds of their commanders. For the Drakians, this was more than a military loss. It was a fracture in their perception of the universe. They had always believed that survival was the ultimate instinct, that every species would bow when faced with annihilation. But the humans had shattered that belief. They had shown that there was something more powerful than the will to live, the will to defy. As Tarek continues his story, his voice carries the weight of a lesson learned too late. The humans had sent a message that day, a message written in fire and blood: we will not surrender. If you come for us, we will make you pay. And the Drakians, blinded by arrogance, had ignored it. The survivors of the explosion, just 37 humans, escaped the inferno in small, fragile pods. These escape vessels were not built for war. They were simple, utilitarian crafts meant for emergencies, barely capable of sustaining life for long. Their engines sputtered as they fled, trailing faint blue exhaust into the void. Behind them, the shattered remains of their station floated in silence, a graveyard of their comrades. Their destination was the Caldero's asteroid field ***, a sprawling labyrinth of rock and ice that stretched across the system like a jagged scar. To the Drakian Dominion, it was nothing more than a nuisance, an inconvenient cluster of debris that slowed navigation. But to the fleeing humans, it was salvation. The Dominion, still reeling from the loss of 4 warships, pursued the survivors with cold fury. The fleet surged forward, their ships cutting through the darkness like predators on the hunt. They expected an easy victory. After all, what could 37 unarmed humans possibly do against the might of the Dominion? But the humans had no intention of going quietly. Among the survivors was Commander Aelric ***, a former engineer who had spent years working in deep space mining operations. He was not a soldier, not a strategist trained in the art of war. Yet in that moment he became something far more dangerous, a cornered man with nothing left to lose. As the pod slipped into the asteroid field, Aelric began to formulate a plan. The Caldero's field was vast, its asteroids tumbling and colliding in an endless dance of chaos. To the Dominion, it was a hazard. To Aelric, it was an opportunity. Using the limited tools and resources salvaged from the escape pods, Aelric and his fellow survivors began to transform the asteroid field into a fortress. They worked tirelessly, their hands blistered and bleeding, their bodies pushed to the brink of exhaustion. Every piece of abandoned machinery, every shard of metal, every ounce of fuel was repurposed into a weapon. Mining lasers, once used to carve through rock, were mounted onto asteroids and rigged to fire at passing ships. Explosives, scavenged from emergency supplies, were hidden within the larger asteroids, tethered to tripwires that would detonate if disturbed. Automated turrets, hastily constructed from spare parts, were programmed to target anything that moved. The result was a deadly maze, a trap so intricate and cruel that even the most advanced Dominion ships could not navigate it unscathed. When the Dominion fleet entered the asteroid field, they did so with confidence. Their ships, sleek and bristling with weaponry, advanced in formation, their sensors scanning for any sign of the humans. But the field was vast, its shadows deep and deceptive. The first explosion came without warning. A Dominion frigate, its hull gleaming under the faint light of a distant star, drifted too close to an asteroid. The hidden mine detonated, sending shards of rock and metal tearing through the ship's armor. It lurched to the side, its engines sputtering, before another explosion ripped it apart. Panic rippled through the fleet. The Drakian commanders barked orders, their voices sharp with frustration. But the asteroid field was alive with danger. Lasers fired from unseen locations, slicing through shields and hulls. Turrets emerged from the shadows, spitting streams of molten energy. Asteroids, seemingly harmless, erupted into fiery blasts when disturbed. For 3 days, the humans held their ground. Every attempt by the Dominion to penetrate the field ended in disaster. Ships were torn apart, their wreckage joining the debris that littered the battlefield. The once proud fleet, which had entered the field with such arrogance, was reduced to chaos. Tarek's voice trembles as he recounts those days, the memory of loss etched into his soul. They didn't fight to survive, he says, his tone heavy with regret. They fought to ensure we paid for every step forward. The humans did not fight like soldiers. They fought like survivors, like people who had been pushed beyond the limits of fear and into the realm of defiance. They knew they could not win. They knew they would not leave the asteroid field alive. But that did not matter. What mattered was making the Dominion bleed. Tarek remembers the faces of his comrades, the fear in their eyes as they watched their ships fall one by one. He remembers the frustration, the helplessness, the growing realization that they were not hunting the humans, they were being hunted. By the end of the third day, the Dominion fleet was in shambles. Of the 15 ships that had entered the field, only 6 remained intact. The rest were either destroyed or too damaged to continue the pursuit. And the humans, they were gone, their final fate unknown. The asteroid field, once a lifeless expanse of rock and ice, had become a graveyard. It was a testament to the ingenuity and determination of a species that refused to be conquered. As Tarek finishes his story, his voice is filled with quiet awe. "We thought we were the hunters, asterisk," he says, his words heavy with shame. "But in that field we were the prey." The lesson was clear, though it came too late for the Dominion. The humans did not fight for survival. They fought to ensure that every inch of ground, every drop of blood, every fleeting moment of victory came at a cost too great to bear. Far from the chaos of the Caldero's asteroid field, a fragile flicker of hope burned on the human colony of *New Dawn*. It was a modest settlement, nestled on the surface of a barren planet whose skies were painted in hues of rust and ash. The colony had been a place of quiet labor, where miners and engineers toiled to carve out a life in the harsh wilderness of space. But now, it became something far greater, a sanctuary for the survivors of humanity's defiance. The remnants of the human race gathered there, their numbers few, their resources meager. They were farmers, teachers, mechanics, ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Leading them was Director Harlow *, a former logistics officer. She had no military training, no grand strategy to guide her. Yet in the face of annihilation, she became the voice of resistance. Harlow stood before the weary colonists, her figure silhouetted against the crimson horizon. Her voice, though hoarse from countless sleepless nights, carried the weight of unyielding resolve. "We cannot run," she told them, her words cutting through the air like steel. "And we will not bow. If they come for us, we will make them pay for every breath they take." The colony became a hive of activity. Under Harlow's leadership, every resource, every scrap of metal, every ounce of fuel was repurposed for war. Cargo ships, once used to transport minerals, were reinforced with crude armor and loaded with explosives. Mining vessels, their drills and lasers meant for carving through rock, were transformed into weapons capable of tearing through the hulls of Dominion warships. Even passenger transports, their interiors stripped bare, were converted into makeshift bombers. The colonists worked tirelessly, their hands blistered and their bodies aching, but their spirits remained unbroken. They knew the Dominion would come. They knew the price they would have to pay, and still they prepared. When the Dominion fleet arrived, it descended upon New Dawn like a storm. The warships, sleek and menacing, blotted out the sky, their engines roaring with the promise of destruction. To the Dominion, this was just another conquest. To the humans, it was a battle for their very existence. Before the first shot was fired, Harlow sent a single message to the Dominion commanders. Her voice was calm, almost cold, as she spoke. "We don't surrender. If you want us, come and take us." The battle that followed was unlike anything the Dominion had ever faced. Human ships, crude and clumsy, launched themselves at the Dominion fleet with reckless abandon. They did not fight with precision or strategy. They fought with desperation, with fury, with a determination that bordered on madness. A cargo ship, its hull patched together with scavenged metal, hurtled toward a Dominion warship. The Drakian crew barely had time to react before the human vessel collided with them, detonating in a fiery explosion that tore through the warship's core. The blast lit up the sky, a brief, blazing star that burned with the lives of those who had sacrificed themselves. Civilians volunteered for suicide missions, their faces grim but resolute as they boarded the makeshift bombers. They knew they would not return. They knew their names would be forgotten. But they also knew their deaths would not be in vain. Every life they gave, every ship they destroyed, was a blow to the Dominion, a reminder that humanity would not go quietly. Among these volunteers was pilot Mira ***, a schoolteacher who had once spent her days guiding young minds and nurturing dreams. Now she guided a cargo ship filled with explosives toward a Dominion cruiser. The ship's engines roared as it accelerated, its course unyielding. The Drakian gunners fired desperately, their weapons carving glowing trails across the sky, but Myra did not waver. Inside the cockpit, Myra's hands were steady as she gripped the controls. Her heart pounded, not with fear but with purpose. She thought of her students, of the laughter that once filled her classroom, of the futures that had been stolen by the Dominion. As the cruiser loomed before her, she whispered a final prayer, not for herself, but for those she would save. The collision was devastating. The explosion consumed the cruiser, its hull crumpling like paper under the force of the blast. 500 Drakian soldiers perished in an instant, their screams lost in the inferno. Myra's sacrifice, like so many others, was a testament to the unyielding spirit of humanity. Tarek's voice cracks as he recounts Myra's story, his words heavy with sorrow and admiration. They were willing to die, he says, his tone trembling, not for victory but to make us bleed. The Dominion had expected submission. They had expected fear. What they encountered instead was a defiance so fierce, so absolute, that it shook them to their core. The humans did not fight for survival. They fought to ensure that every inch the Dominion gained, every life they took, came at an unbearable cost. As the battle raged on, the skies above New Dawn burned with fire and ash. The ground trembled with the echoes of explosions, and the air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke and blood. The colonists fought not as soldiers, but as people who had nothing left to lose. Every sacrifice, every act of defiance was a declaration. You may take our lives, but you will never break us. By the end of the battle, New Dawn was in ruins. The colony, once a fragile beacon of hope, was reduced to smoldering rubble. But the Dominion fleet, too, was shattered. Of the ships that had arrived, only a handful limped away, their pride and power scarred beyond recognition. Tarek's voice falls to a whisper as he concludes the tale, his words laced with regret and awe. We thought we could break them, he says, but instead they broke us. The story of New Dawn was not one of victory. It was a story of sacrifice, of resilience, of a people who refused to be conquered. And in their defiance, the humans proved a truth that the Dominion had long ignored. That even in the face of overwhelming power, the human spirit could not be extinguished. The Orion defense lines stretched across the void like a fragile thread, separating humanity's last hope from the encroaching darkness of the Dominion. It was not a line drawn on maps or marked by towering fortresses. It was a collection of battered ships, repurposed stations, and desperate souls who had nowhere left to run. Beyond it lay extinction. The Dominion, driven by fury and desperation, amassed the Imperial Armada a fleet of 300 warships that blotted out the stars with their sheer numbers. The Armada was a terrifying sight, its ships gleaming like blades, their engines humming with the promise of annihilation. They were the embodiment of power, a force that had crushed countless civilizations before humanity dared to resist. But the humans did not cower. They had long since abandoned fear, replaced it with a cold, unyielding resolve. At the helm of their defense was Captain Solon ***, a former freighter captain whose name had become a rallying cry for the remnants of humanity. Her ship, the *Iron Star ***, was no warship. It was a bulky, weathered freighter, its hull scarred from years of labor. The battle began with the Armada's advance, their ships moving in perfect formation, a tide of destruction sweeping toward the line. The human vessels, scattered and mismatched, seemed pitiful in comparison. Yet as the Dominion ships approached, the humans struck with a ferocity that stunned even the most hardened Drakian commanders. Civilian ships, patched together with salvaged armor and loaded with explosives, launched themselves into the heart of the Armada. Their engines screamed as they accelerated, their hulls glowing with the heat of their final journey. When they collided with Dominion warships, the explosions lit up the void like dying stars, tearing through the sleek metal of the enemy fleet. Space stations, once hubs of commerce and community, were transformed into massive bombs. Their cores, overloaded with energy, were rigged to detonate when Dominion ships came too close. The blasts were devastating, sending shockwaves rippling through the battlefield, scattering debris like deadly shrapnel. Even personal shuttles, the smallest and most vulnerable of vessels, were turned into weapons. Pilots, many of them civilians with no combat experience, volunteered for kamikaze missions. They knew their chances of survival were non-existent. They knew their names would be forgotten. But they also knew their sacrifice would buy humanity precious time. Tarek's voice trembles as he describes the chaos. They didn't fight like soldiers, he says, his tone heavy with awe and sorrow. They fought like a species with nothing to lose. The battle was a symphony of destruction, a relentless exchange of fire and fury that turned the Orion line into a graveyard of ships and lives. Dominion warships unleashed torrents of plasma and missiles, their weapons carving glowing trails across the void. Human vessels answered with crude but devastating attacks, their explosions shaking the Armada to its core. The Iron Star at the center of the human defense became a beacon of resistance. From its battered bridge, Captain Solon directed the chaos, her voice calm and steady despite the storm raging around her. She knew the odds. She knew the cost, but she also knew that surrender was not an option. As the battle dragged on, the Dominion began to falter. Their commanders, accustomed to swift and decisive victories, found themselves bogged down in a conflict unlike any they had faced before. Every ship they lost, every soldier who fell, was a reminder that humanity would not go quietly. Tarek's voice grows heavier as he recounts the relentless defiance of the humans. They fought not for victory, he says, but to ensure we paid for every breath we took. The Orion line was not a battlefield. It was a crucible, a place where the spirit of humanity was tested and found unbreakable. The humans knew they could not win. They knew their sacrifices would not save their species. But they also knew that their defiance would leave a scar on the Dominion, a wound that would never fully heal. As the Armada began to withdraw, its ships battered and broken, the Orion line stood as a testament to the power of resistance. It was a place of loss, of sacrifice, of unimaginable courage. And though the humans who fought there were gone, their legacy remained. A reminder that even in the face of overwhelming power, the will to fight could never be extinguished. Tarek's final words are a whisper, barely audible over the weight of his memories. We thought we could crush them, he says, but instead, They taught us what it means to fight. The story of the Orion Line is not one of victory. It is a story of defiance, of resilience, of a species that refused to surrender even when all hope was lost. And in their defiance, humanity proved a truth that the Dominion had long ignored. That even the smallest spark could ignite a fire that burned brighter than the stars. For 6 long months, the void was a battlefield, echoing with the relentless clash of steel and fire. The Dominion Armada, once a symbol of invincible might, was gradually whittled down to a mere shadow of its former self. From an imposing fleet of 300 warships, only 50 remained, their hulls scarred and their spirits battered. The humans, driven by desperation and an indomitable will to survive, had turned the tide of battle through sheer tenacity. They fought not for victory, but for the chance to make their enemy bleed. Every day was a struggle, every hour a test of endurance and resolve. Yet, despite the odds, they stood firm, refusing to yield. At the heart of this defiance was Captain Solon ***, whose name had become synonymous with courage. Her ship, the Iron Star ***, was more than just a vessel. It was a beacon of hope, a rallying point for those who refused to bow to the Dominion's tyranny. Solon's leadership was marked by a fierce determination, a willingness to sacrifice everything for the sake of her people. In the final days of the conflict, Solon made a decision that would become legend. As the Dominion flagship loomed before her, a monstrous silhouette against the backdrop of distant stars, she knew that the time had come for a decisive act. The Iron Star, battered but unbroken, set its course for the heart of the enemy fleet. The collision was cataclysmic. The Iron Star, filled with the hopes and dreams of its crew, plunged into the Dominion flagship with unstoppable force. The resulting explosion was a supernova of light and sound, a blinding flash that illuminated the dark expanse of space. It was a moment of both triumph and tragedy, a final act of defiance that shattered the Dominion's resolve. Tarek's voice, heavy with emotion, recounts the words of Admiral Kale ***, the Dominion's fleet commander. "We cannot defeat an enemy that sees mutual destruction as victory," Kale had said, his voice tinged with disbelief and respect. The realization that the humans valued their freedom more than their lives was a bitter pill for the Dominion to swallow. In the aftermath of the explosion, the Dominion fleet retreated, their pride and power broken. The once mighty Armada limped away, a defeated force humbled by the resilience of a species they had underestimated. Yet the cost had been high, and the scars of battle ran deep. As Tarek pauses, his voice is filled with regret, a haunting echo of what was lost. "We thought the war was over," he admits, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a specter. "We were wronged." The humans believed they had won a reprieve, a chance to rebuild and recover from the devastation. But beneath the surface, the seeds of future conflict were already taking root. The Dominion's retreat was not a surrender, but a regrouping, a pause in a war that was far from over. The story of the breaking point is one of sacrifice and resilience, a testament to the power of the human spirit. It is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can shine through, a beacon that guides the way forward. Yet it also serves as a cautionary tale, a warning that the fight for survival is never truly over. In the silence that follows, the echoes of the past linger, a reminder of the price that was paid and the battles yet to come. The breaking point was not an end, but a beginning, a new chapter in the saga of humanity's struggle against the darkness. And as the stars continue to shine, the story unfolds, a testament to the enduring power of hope and defiance. The war had ended, but the scars it left behind were deep and unyielding, etched into the fabric of both the Dominion and humanity. The hologram shifts, revealing a galaxy forever changed by the conflict. The once mighty Dominion, whose fleets had darkened the stars and whose banners had claimed countless worlds, now lay in shambles. Their economy, once the lifeblood of their empire, was in ruins. Planets that had been thriving centers of trade and power were now shadows of their former selves, their resources drained, their people struggling to rebuild. The military, once a symbol of invincibility, was shattered, its fleets decimated, and its commanders haunted by the memories of a war they could not win. But the most devastating blow was not to their ships or their economy. It was to their spirit. The Dominion had always believed in their superiority, their right to rule, their unshakable dominance. Yet the war had shown them a truth they could not ignore. Humanity was unlike any enemy they had ever faced. Tarek's voice trembles as he recounts the psychological toll the war had taken on the Dominion. The leaders, those who sat in their grand halls far from the battlefield, refused to believe the reports. They dismissed the stories of humanity's defiance as exaggerations, fabrications created by desperate soldiers. How could a species so small, so scattered, stand against the might of the Dominion? It was unthinkable. But those who had faced the humans knew the truth. The soldiers who had seen the Orion line, who had watched as civilian ships became weapons, who had felt the shockwaves of the Iron Star's final act, they carried the weight of that truth in their hearts. They had seen the fire in humanity's eyes, a fire that burned brighter than any star. Tarek's voice drops, heavy with the weight of memory. They don't fight for victory, he says, his words slow and deliberate. They fight to ensure you can't win either. The Dominion's pride had been their downfall. They had underestimated humanity, believing them to be weak, disorganized, insignificant. But humanity had shown them a strength that could not be measured in numbers or technology. It was a strength born of desperation, of a refusal to surrender, of an unyielding will to survive. Meanwhile, humanity began to rebuild. Their colonies, once vulnerable outposts, were transformed into fortified bastions. The wounds of war were still fresh, but they did not allow themselves to falter. Every scar, every loss became a reminder of what they had fought for and what they had endured. The colonies were no longer just homes. They were fortresses, symbols of resilience and determination. The people worked tirelessly, their hands calloused and their faces lined with exhaustion. But in their eyes was a spark of hope, a belief that they could rise from the ashes stronger than before. The stars that had once been silent witnesses to the conflict now bore the marks of humanity's defiance. The wreckage of ships drifted through the void, a haunting reminder of the cost of war. Yet amidst the debris there was a sense of quiet triumph. Humanity had survived, but survival came at a cost. The war had changed them, hardened them. They were no longer the same species that had once looked to the stars with wonder and curiosity. They had been forged in the crucible of war, and the fire had left them unyielding, unbreakable. As Tarek speaks, his voice is filled with a mix of admiration and sorrow. The Dominion had learned a bitter lesson, one they would never forget. Humanity was not a foe to be conquered. They were a force to be reckoned with, a species that fought not for conquest but for survival, and in doing so had ensured that even in defeat they could. The story shifts to the present day, and the air grows heavy with foreboding. The Zorath hegemony, a proud and arrogant empire, has declared war on humanity. Their confidence is unshakable, their belief in their superiority absolute. For centuries, the Zorath had stood as a beacon of technological advancement, their fleets outfitted with weapons that could obliterate entire planets, their soldiers trained to perfection. To them, humanity was nothing more than an inconvenience, a scattered, stubborn species that needed to be brought to heel. Tarek's voice cuts through the silence, low and grave. The Zorath are making the same mistake we did, he says, his words laced with a quiet despair. They think humanity can be conquered. They don't understand what they're up against. The hologram shifts, and the first skirmishes come into view. The Zorath ships, sleek and bristling with advanced weaponry, descend upon human patrols with the confidence of predators stalking prey. But what they encounter is far from helpless. Human ships, smaller and less advanced, move with a feral precision. They strike from the shadows, exploiting every weakness, every blind spot. The Zorath ships are torn apart, their wreckage left to drift in the void. The tactics are familiar, eerily so. They are the same strategies humanity used 50 years ago, honed and perfected through generations of survival. The Zorath commanders, watching from their distant thrones, dismiss the losses as anomalies. They cannot fathom that these primitive humans could pose a real threat. But on the front lines, the truth is undeniable. The humans are not fighting for conquest or glory. They are fighting to survive, and that makes them dangerous in ways the Zorath cannot comprehend. The hologram shifts again, and the scene is no longer one of battle but of preparation. Civilians, their faces etched with determination, step forward to volunteer as pilots for bomb ships. These are not soldiers. They are farmers, teachers, engineers. Ordinary people who have made the extraordinary choice to sacrifice themselves for the greater good. Their ships are not sleek or advanced. They are patched-together vessels, bristling with explosives, designed for one purpose: to crash into the enemy and take as many of them as possible. In the colonies, the atmosphere is tense but resolute. Children are evacuated, their small hands clutching at their parents as they are led onto transport ships. There are tears, whispered goodbyes, and promises to reunite that may never be kept. But the adults who remain do not falter. They take up tools and weapons, transforming every ship, every station into a fortress. The air hums with the sound of preparation, the quiet resolve of a people who have faced extinction before and refused to succumb. Tarek's voice rises, his tone filled with urgency and a hint of despair. Humans don't fight wars, he says, his words sharp and unrelenting. They turn wars into nightmares. They make you ask, how much are you willing to lose for victory? The Zorath, for all their arrogance, are beginning to feel the weight of that question. Their fleets, so confident in their superiority, are being torn apart by a species that refuses to play by the rules of conventional warfare. The humans fight like cornered wolves, their desperation transforming them into something fierce and unrelenting. The hologram flickers, showing scenes of devastation. Zorath ships burn in the cold void of space, their hulks drifting lifelessly. Human colonies, though battered and scarred, stand defiant, their people unbroken. The Zorath commanders, watching from afar, begin to understand the gravity of their mistake. But for many, it is already too late. Tarek's voice softens, but the weight of his words remains. The Zorath thought their weapons would bring them victory. They thought their strength would break humanity, but they didn't understand. Humanity doesn't fight to win. They fight to make sure you lose. And in the end, they will make you question everything: your strength, your resolve, your very reason for fighting. The hologram fades, leaving behind a chilling silence. The Zorath hegemony, so sure of their superiority, is learning the same lesson the Dominion did half a century ago. Humanity is not a foe to be underestimated. They are a force of nature, a storm that cannot be contained. And as the stars bear witness to this new conflict, one thing is clear. The Zorath are facing a war unlike any they have ever known. The question lingers in the air, unspoken but heavy. How much are they willing to lose? The air grows thick with tension as Tarek's voice echoes through the chamber, carrying the weight of 1,000 lessons learned too late. His face is lined with age and weariness, his eyes shadowed by memories of war and loss. He stands before the Galactic Concordium, his presence a grim reminder of the price of arrogance. "Stay away from humans," he begins, his voice low but steady, each word heavy with warning. "Don't provoke them. They don't give mercy because they don't ask for it." His words hang in the air like a storm cloud, ominous and unrelenting. Around him, the members of the Concordium shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some scoff, their pride refusing to acknowledge the gravity of his message. Others sit in silence, their eyes fixed on the hologram, their faces pale with unease. Suddenly, the stillness is shattered by the piercing wail of alarms. The chamber erupts into chaos as reports flood in, each one more dire than the last. Zorath fleets annihilated, entire battalions wiped out, colonies falling to human forces that fight with a ferocity unmatched by any known species. The room fills with frantic voices, overlapping in a cacophony of panic. Leaders demand answers, their faces twisted with fear and disbelief. How could this be happening? How could the mighty Zorath hegemony, with all its power and technological superiority, be brought to its knees? Tarek watches the chaos unfold with tired eyes. He does not flinch at the sound of the alarms or the rising panic around him. He has seen this before. He has lived it. And now he watches as another species walks the same path of hubris and destruction. "Another species will learn what we learned," he says softly, his voice barely audible above the noise. But those who hear him fall silent, his words cutting through the din like a blade. "Humans don't fight to win. They fight to make sure you lose, too." For a moment, the chaos subsides, and the weight of his words settles over the room. The leaders of the Concordium exchange uneasy glances, their confidence shaken. The reports continue to pour in, each one painting a darker picture of the war. The Zorath are not just losing, they are being dismantled piece by piece by a species that fights with a terrifying resolve. The hologram flickers and the room is plunged into darkness. For a heartbeat, there is silence, broken only by the faint hum of the machinery. Then words appear on the screen, stark and unyielding against the void. "Never challenge humanity. They will never give you one last chance." The message lingers, burning itself into the minds of all who see it. It is not a threat. It is a promise, a final warning from a species that has been pushed to the brink and emerged unbroken. As the screen fades to black, the room is left in silence. The leaders of the Concordium sit motionless, their faces pale, their minds racing. Tarek's words echo in their ears, a haunting reminder of the cost of underestimating humanity. Somewhere out in the vast expanse of the galaxy, the war rages on. The Zorath hegemony once